Professional wrestling has always faced one major critique from its haters: it's fake. For some reason, people who are anti-WWE can't get behind the idea of a predetermined outcome. Even Hall of Famer Kurt Angle thought that until he stepped into the ring. But what he did not realize was that the WWE would bring him more pain than real wrestling ever could, which means a lot coming from the man who won an Olympic gold medal with a literal broken neck. While millions around the world saw a triumphant American hero, deep down Kurt Angle was suffering unimaginable physical pain and coping with the loss of several close friends and family members. But there was one way he could get relief from the physical and emotional toll, and that was by consuming a toxic cocktail of alcohol and prescription pills.
I was taking 65 extra drinks Vicodin in a day. That's how out of control I got. And I was hiding it from the company.
Kurt nearly died multiple times for a sport the world calls fake, but nothing about what he went through was pretend. This is the brutal and tragic story of Kurt Angle. There's an assumption that Kurt was this otherworldly child prodigy athlete, but that's not exactly true. Growing up in Lebanon, Pennsylvania, Kurt Angle lived and breathed contact sports. When he wasn't debating passionately about his favorite teams at the dinner table with his 5 older siblings, he was busy practicing as an amateur wrestler, something he picked up at just 7 years old. But being an athlete in a family of older, stronger athletes wasn't easy. Kurt has been open about how his early life was packed with one loss after another. I actually wasn't doing that well. And the documentary, Angle, they say I was a great athlete since I was born. That's not true. I was the worst athlete in my family, and that wasn't bad because everyone in my family were good athletes, but I lost a lot when I was younger. I cried a lot. I was a real crybaby. My family doubted if I'd ever be good at sports. From the start, it almost seemed like he was cursed. His life seemed to be going in the right direction in one moment, with hard work and perseverance, and then in another, he'd suddenly confront crippling tragedy that would push him closer to the edge. Starting in 1984, when he lost his father, David Angle, to a freak accident on the job. David was a construction worker, and one day when he went to get his lunch, he stepped on rebarb, lost his balance, and fell 13 feet onto the hard ground, breaking his shoulder and fracturing his skull. He was placed on life support, and Kurt's mother Jackie ultimately made the decision to end his suffering, weeping as she had to pull the plug on the man who held their family together. And this would have sent most others into a downward spiral. However, Kurt's dad said something to him just a year before, giving him the strength to keep fighting. He told me this the year before he died. He said, "You're gonna be the one." And I didn't understand him, but he knew, for some reason, that I'd break out of this crybaby stage and end up being a great performer. So I didn't understand what he meant, and when he passed away the next year, I thought, my dad said I was gonna be the one. I gotta start working hard now. And from that day forward, Kurt would carry the words of his late father in his head, praying before every competition with the belief that it would help him succeed. And as he dedicated his life to chasing a gold medal, he would end up with countless tragedies along the way. For 4 straight years, Kurt Angle put everything he had into preparing for the 1996 Summer Olympics. He was ranked 2nd in the US World Team, yet he struggled to find his footing. As he began losing matches, his confidence took a significant hit. However, Kurt's father was not the only person who had faith in him. Olympic gold-winning wrestler Dave Schultz was quickly becoming his mentor and invited Kurt to train at Foxcatcher, a facility in Philadelphia owned by John DuPont.
Dave told me that John DuPont started a wrestling club and he was going to be coaching there. And I thought, wow, this is a great opportunity. I said, do you think that they'd be interested in me? He said, if you win the NCAAs this year, I'm sure they will. And I did. I won the NCAAs that year. And, you know, Dave and John invited me to the farm.
At the time, John DuPont's Foxcatcher Ranch was a camp for the global wrestling elite, partly because DuPont dumped massive amounts of his family fortune into the program, but mostly because it was home to the Schultz brothers, the only American brothers to win both world and Olympic gold and have more NCAA, US Open World, and Olympic titles than any other American brother combination in history. For Kurt, this wasn't just a chance to work with the greats. He really loved Dave and saw him as everything he had ever aspired to be. But Foxcatcher amateur ranch was far from a perfect environment, and hyper-focused athletes like Kurt and Dave could never predict how horrifying their experience would be. Chances are you know someone who has been seriously hurt in an accident. If that wasn't bad enough, they end up with huge bills from the hospital, making not only their health a concern, but also their finances. When you're seriously hurt, your injury could be worth millions. Morgan & Morgan is America's largest injury law firm with over 1,000 attorneys operating in all 50 states, and they don't settle for lowball offers. They achieved significant verdicts in the past couple of months for victims involved in life-altering car crashes. For example, $12 million in Florida, 34 times the highest insurance offer, $26 million in Philadelphia, 40 times the highest insurance offer. Their fee is absolutely free unless you win. If you ever get seriously injured, your case could be worth millions, and you're only a few clicks away from potentially changing your life. It's so easy. You can start your claim now with Morgan & Morgan at forthepeople.com/Patrick or by scanning the QR code on screen from your phone's camera. Kurt developed a foolproof strategy of deliberately slowing down the pace of his matches, saying, "If I didn't get tired, I was going to win." He immediately began focus on endurance and believed that his training only began once he became exhausted. Angle's grueling regimen included a 6-mile run completed in 38 minutes, 10 200-yard hill sprints with someone on his back, and then another 10 sprints without assistance. He would then do drills on the mat for 4 to 5 hours, rotating between 3 to 4 training partners. Then he took a 30-minute break before repeating this entire process. His evenings were reserved for plyometrics and weight training. His goal was to see how far he could push his body to its limits. For 2 consecutive years, Kurt trained 3 times a day for 28 out of 30 days each month, and because of that, he was knocking off the best conditioned wrestlers in the world, establishing him as a serious contender for the gold medal at the 1996 Summer Olympics. But there was something lurking in the background that neither Dave nor Kurt could have seen coming. Foxcatcher's leader, John DuPont, was about to snap, and his mental decline was becoming more and more noticeable to residents of the ranch.
Merry Christmas! Don't hurt yourself.
The property changed to a militarized zone. I said, "Who are you afraid of?" And John said, "You never know who it might be."
Uh-oh, it's getting a little more serious.
I was really worried.
You gotta get out of there. You gotta get out of there now.
While it wasn't known by the general public at the time, John DuPont was a paranoid schizophrenic who had become fixated on creating a new legacy for the DuPont name. He had a creepy fixation with the Schultz brothers and other wrestlers living on his compound, turning it into a fortress, playing with firearms without warning and waving them in the faces of the wrestlers. He also told one wrestler that Foxcatcher would become a KKK organization and constantly had to be reassured by Dave that shadowy figures weren't coming out of the walls, all while he was drunk or high on random drugs. Dave Schultz's brother Mark would later describe how they felt scared, but they couldn't justify leaving with so little money. "I was kind of trapped in a way because I was competing for the world championships, and there weren't a whole lot of options for me. Because I was an Olympic champion, I was so used to people treating me with respect. It just didn't occur to me that someone would be so underhanded." Eventually, after one too many gun-associated confrontations with DuPont, Mark vowed never to return. However, Dave returned to practice at the ranch regardless. He was in complete denial because of his own progress and the growth of great wrestlers like Kurt Angle. He believed that DuPont was a gift to the world of Olympic wrestling. He knew he was unstable, but DuPont was a frail old man and not a perceived threat to an Olympic gold medalist. Tragically, on January 26, 1996 at 2 p.m., John DuPont grabbed a .44 Magnum and ordered his security consultant to drive him to Dave Schultz's house. Dave's last words were, "Hi, boss," with a smile and a friendly wave. DuPont answered him with a gun pointed at his head. He screamed, "You got a problem with me?" and opened fire, shooting Schultz dead on the spot. Right after, DuPont's own security turned on him, but he managed to jump in his car, flee to his mansion, and hide from prying eyes as the whole SWAT team surrounded his house, managing to avoid arrest for days until they finally captured him.
DuPont allegedly shot Olympic wrestling champion David Schultz. Schultz, who won a gold medal in the 1984 Summer Olympics, lived with his family in a home on the estate. It is at that home that police say DuPont drove up and shot Schultz in the driveway. Schultz's wife, Nancy, was a witness to the event. The family's grief was evident on the face of Schultz's daughter as her mother explained their loss.
My family must now turn its focus and energy to my children, Alexander and Danielle, who've had a very close relationship with their father and who are struggling to understand how and why this tragedy happened and how they will possibly fill this void in their lives.
Just like that, a little girl lost a father, and wrestlers like Kurt Angle had to find out they lost a friend from the news. He had just talked to Dave earlier that day. Understandably, Kurt can't seem to talk about Dave's death without looking like he's on the verge of breaking down.
Someone tuned into CNN in the office and saw that Dave Schultz was shot. They didn't say he was murdered, just that he got shot. I called Dave earlier that day and left him a message and told him I was coming out to Foxcatcher to train that week. I wanted to go out and have Dave train me. Dave was my coach at the time, and along with a couple other coaches, but Dave was my key coach. And it blew me away. I couldn't believe that DuPont killed him, but I knew that John DuPont was acting a little suspicious. You know, he was seemed like he was always sedated, some kind of drug, carrying a gun with him around with him all the time. I mean, he was like a ticking time bomb.
Facing the grief of losing yet another father figure, Kurt fully immersed himself in wrestling, training harder than he ever had before. He dominated his weight class during the 1996 US Open. However, during the semifinals, he failed to execute a move, landing face first on the mat. This impact resulted in a series of cracking and crunching sounds in his neck. After getting back on his feet, Angle realized he couldn't feel his arms. Despite this significant obstacle, Kurt continued to fight, gradually scoring points and eventually managing to secure a win. Following the match, he approached the trainer, who began to crack his neck, eliciting a sharp pain that coursed down his back and arms. 8 hours after the semifinals, Angle was set to compete in the finals against Kerry McCoy, one of the most accomplished wrestlers in US history. He considered taking a break, knowing that second place would still qualify him for the Olympic trials. But wanting to make Dave and his dad proud, he wrestled anyway, but he did do everything he could to avoid engaging in the match. Miraculously, Kurt managed to pull off the victory and was one step forward to achieving his Olympic aspirations. This would be Kurt's defining characteristic as an athlete. His career is packed with memorable moments where he defied the odds, but he might be one of the only people on the planet who would hop back into a full contact brawl half paralyzed. To this day, it's arguably what he's most remembered for, with memes popping up anytime someone does something remotely impressive both in and out of pro wrestling. But as inspiring as this sounds, Kurt was falling into a common mental trap for aspiring professional athletes. He refused to give his body rest out of fear of losing momentum, literally tearing himself apart over and over. He'd soon have to confront a serious question. Would you rather be safe and heal your injuries, or fight through the constant pain and risk it all? Kurt visited a chiropractor who conducted an x-ray and informed him that he had 4 fractured vertebrae. 2 of the discs were pressing against his spinal cord, and he was one wrong move away from being completely paralyzed, or maybe even dead. But Kurt was an absolute madman. Even though his body was starting to fail, he continued doing weight training and cardio. He explained on the Joe Rogan Experience that instead of slowing down, he went on to participate in the Olympic trials, where wrestlers were eager to exploit his injuries. He had to depend on a traveling physician to give him Novocaine before each match to kill the pain of a broken neck.
I said, what's your plan? He said, well, you're not going to be able to train much. You're going to have to let your neck rest and heal for the next 6 weeks. And it won't be completely healed, but it'll be healed enough that you can still go. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a doctor travel with you. And this doctor's going to stick you with 12 shots of Novocaine in your neck 5 minutes before each one of your matches. Therefore, you won't feel the pain. You'll forget your neck is broken and you'll wrestle more freely. But he said, I'm warning you, an hour after your matches are over, you're going to be in excruciating pain from the abuse your neck takes during those matches. And he said, are you okay with this? And I said, yeah. guess, and it worked.
But when he finally got to the 1996 Olympics, his opponents knew about his neck and they planned on exploiting it. But Kurt wasn't going to go down easy. In his first match, Kurt defeated a wrestler from Mongolia 4-0. His next opponent was a 7-foot-tall Cuban, and after a tense bout that ended 0-0, he ended up scoring a victory with just 4 seconds remaining in double OT. And in the following match against a Russian competitor, he found himself trailing 3-0 early on, but his opponent used up all his energy. But as we know, Kurt's cardio was world class, and he ended up coming back from a 3-0 deficit to win with a score of 4-3. Then Kurt found himself against Abbas Jadidi, the most renowned Iranian wrestler to date. And for Kurt, this was it. He had pushed through broken bones and several personal tragedies just for a chance at making it big. He was the underdog. The only chance he had was to wear his opponent down without losing the ability to move. And surprisingly, the strategy really worked.
Both wrestlers have really expended and extended themselves in this match, despite the 1-1 score.
Shadidi showing a lot of power in this overtime.
Off the mat, no points, no score. 1 minute and 25 seconds left in the sudden death. Jackie, Kurt's mom, very nervous. Sometimes she leaves. She gets so nervous and anxious, but she's going to stay here for this one.
And Jadidi here
taking a break.
But when the match ended, it all came down to a referee's decision. All Kurt could think was, 4 more years. I have to do this for 4 more years. He knew he wouldn't be able to just stop wrestling after earning second place. But after some tense debate, the referee raised Kurt's hand, and he realized he had just won a gold medal despite competing with a broken neck.
There's the hand being raised. The referees didn't know. First raised one hand, then the other, and elated. Kurt Angle jumps for joy with this victory and gold medal.
And in that moment, it was as if the curse had been lifted. Kurt proved to himself, his dad, and his mentor David Schultz that he was one of the greatest athletes who had ever lived. It took a tremendous amount of strength and stamina to be a gold medalist wrestler, and to do it all with a broken neck, that was enough to make Kurt Angle a legend. But, legend or not, Kurt was still incredibly poor. There was a reason why Olympic wrestlers were willing to put up with a schizophrenic DuPont who was waving guns around and shouting at ghosts. The only way most Olympians made it out of poverty is if someone came along to capitalize on their hard-earned success. For Kurt, this would be Vince McMahon, the architect of the modern WWE, and it would become clear that the pain Kurt was feeling was far from over. He was going to break his body over and over again in the WWE, developing a brutal addiction and even more tragedy that would last him a lifetime. Following Kurt Angle's victory at the Olympics, he had the kind of storyline that would make any savvy businessman see dollar signs. The story about his dad, the connection to one of the greatest Olympic scandals of all time, and winning the gold while almost becoming paralyzed. It was something that wrestling fanatic Vince McMahon had been praying for since he started his pro wrestling empire. At the time, McMahon was willing to do anything that he could to legitimize his industry, and there was no better way to do it than to get an actual gold medalist on his team. And to get Angle's attention, McMahon rolled out the red carpet, sparing no expense to convince Kurt that this was his future. Kurt described the whole experience saying, "I didn't know what I was getting into. Going up there and them giving me the whole limo treatment and first class airfare and treating me like an important person, it was pretty cool. Going into Vince's office and talking to him was a bit overwhelming. I knew of him and what he's accomplished, and to meet with him, he straight up gave me a 10-year deal. This is what it is, and this is what you're gonna get. Take it or leave it." I asked him if I could talk to my agent first before I decided, and Vince said, "That's fine." The meeting wasn't that long, but I told him I was interested. I didn't know if I was gonna sign or not. And the offer McMahon gave Kurt was way more than the average pro wrestler at the time, who received a 10-year contract for $5 million. But surprisingly, Kurt rejected the initial offer. It was more money than he could have ever dreamed of, and yet he couldn't help but feel that this career change felt a little cheap and silly. If he signed with the WWF, he would have to accept scripted losses from people who would never come close to achieving what he did in 1996. Imagine being the actual best wrestler in the world, having won an Olympic gold medal against the highest level of competition possible, and then entering the WWF and fake fighting in front of a crowd that saw you fight legitimately with a broken neck. It may have felt like a serious step back. But after some thought in 1998, Kurt was convinced to try out for the WWF, accepting a contract within days and training under Dory Funk Jr. He debuted in the WWA, which is essentially the minor leagues, and from there, his attitude towards professional wrestling was starting to change. He knew that the fights in the ring were scripted, but he also started to understand that this didn't mean that there weren't quality athletes taking on serious risks. When I got to the WWE, my attitude changed. I started getting what it's all about and understanding it. It was actually in early 1998. I started watching it on TV. I started watching Monday Night Raw. What caught me was Austin, Rock, Undertaker, Triple H. It was a fun show to watch, and they were very athletic. I was really surprised at their athleticism. Seeing them go through the ring, the issue was, I still thought it was a bunch of stunts. I didn't know there was psychology and storytelling involved. That's what I thought. Pro wrestlers were Hollywood stuntmen. I didn't understand there was some wrestling involved in pro wrestling. It was an eye-opening experience for me. And after a year of matches and constant training, Kurt Angle had his first televised match at Survivor Series 1999, where he defeated Shawn Stasiak. From here, Angle proceeded to have one of the greatest rookie years in pro wrestling history. He remained undefeated for 2 months, with his first loss coming at the Royal Rumble in January of 2000. The following month, he won both the European and Intercontinental Championships. His character initially presented him as a virtuous and patriotic figure, emphasizing his Olympic success and promoting his 3 I's: intensity, integrity, and intelligence. His moves in professional wrestling largely reflected his Olympic wrestling background. His signature moves included the angle slam and the ankle lock. This persona was originally designed to make him a role model and give some legitimacy to wrestling. However, his overly self-righteous demeanor and cocky and condescending attitude quickly turned him into a comedic heel. By 2003, Kurt Angle was more recognized for his pro wrestling career than his journey to Olympic gold. He had performed with industry legends like The Rock to win the WWF Championship, engaged in a feud with Stone Cold Steve Austin, and had generally proven to be the kind of athlete that was able to pull off incredible stunts while goofing off in a way that let audiences know he didn't take himself too seriously. But he was about to make history that would change the course of the WWE and his life forever when he feuded with Brock Lesnar. To fans, this was a match made in heaven.
When I was in the ring, I took a lot of pride in what I did.
Angle slam!
I always wanted to be the best. I was always the best.
Kurt Angle is a WWF champion!
God put me on this earth to be a professional wrestler.
Look at this monster!
I think Kurt Angle wanted to know just how good he really was. And no one could push him like Brock Lesnar could push him.
To this day, the climax of the feud at WrestleMania 19 is considered to be a technical masterpiece. Brock and Kurt were at the top of their game, and every fan was tuned in to see them settle their rivalry once and for all. But tragically, it looked like Kurt Angle's curse was far from over. Once again, his body was starting to quit on him. And now looking back on this legendary feud, it's obvious that every hit Kurt was taking was absolute agony. Even though professional wrestling looked like a positive distraction, Kurt wasn't as young as he used to be. He was a 35-year-old man held together by incredibly invasive procedures, and because he refused to slow down, he was forced to make a visit to the hospital that would change his life forever. He underwent neck surgery to repair nerve and spinal damage, calcium buildup, bone spurs, and intervertebral disc issues. Instead of removing the discs and fusing his vertebrae together, Angle opted for a less conventional surgery where only the spurs and selected portions of the discs were removed, and the surgery was mostly a success. It reduced Angle's rehabilitation time from 1 year to 3 months. But in order to help with the speedy recovery, Kurt's doctor prescribed an increasingly popular painkiller called Vicodin, an opioid used to numb the pain from severe injuries and after intense procedures. At the time, Kurt didn't see the big deal. 1 pill every 3 to 4 hours in the short term seemed simple enough. However, as the pain became more mental than physical, Kurt would find himself confronting the greatest battle of his life, struggling with an addiction that was very new to the American public, and even he could not have predicted that his greatest rival wouldn't be on the mat or in the ring. This time, it would be against himself. Back in Virginia, his sister Leanne had been struggling financially. For a long time, she had been losing her self-worth after enduring 3 unhappy marriages, and to cope with the pain, she resorted to doing H. To finance her habit, Leanne frequently called Kurt asking for money. That was until he discovered she was spending it on drugs and had accumulated a debt of $35,000, prompting Kurt to insist that she move back to Pittsburgh to stay with their mother, or he wouldn't help with her debt. With no other options left, she returned home. Kurt settled her debts, and for a time, Leanne appeared to be doing well. But even though Kurt's sister was surrounded by family, she could not kick her dependence on the drug. Sticking to his word, Kurt chose not to speak with her after discovering she didn't stop, and in less than a year, she lost her life. She didn't get clean, so for the next 8 months I didn't talk to her. Then she overdosed. And this is what ultimately pushed Kurt over the edge. There's a saying that addiction is a family disease. One person may use it, but the whole family suffers. But what they forget to mention is that addiction itself often runs in the family. If one person is using, there's likely more suffering on the other side of the table. In his interview with Joe Rogan, Kurt explained that the loss of 2 family members was too much to handle, and his relationship with Vicodin was seriously spiraling out of control.
So here I am, I'm in a hotel room, and I look at my pills. I said, F it. I took 20 of them, threw them in my mouth, chewed them up, and swallowed them. I didn't wake up till 5 o'clock in the afternoon next day. And I had the biggest match of my career.
That night.
At this point, the Vicodin wasn't even there to help with the pain. It was a ritual that prevented Kurt from absolutely losing his mind. Each night, he placed 15 pills on his bedside table because when he woke up, he would be having withdrawal symptoms. Within 6 months, Engel was taking 65 extra strength Vicodin pills per day.
I was taking 65 extra strength Vicodin a day. That's how out of control I got. And I was hiding it from the company.
Surprisingly at first, Engel's substance abuse issues had no effect on his in-ring performance. But in order to support his drug habit, he needed to work. In order to work, he needed to endure the pain. And to mask the pain, he managed to justify taking enough pills to kill several full-grown men. He had a calendar to set up a schedule of when he would call each doctor to get a different script for more. He also had a contact in Mexico to get them illegally. Now, the pills became his top priority. Nothing else mattered. And in the following years, Engel's behavior would become so erratic that he did not recognize himself. It drove his life into the ground while destroying his reputation. In 2005, Engel was doing anything and everything to stay relevant and get more drug money, and this escalated in a feud with Booker T. For context, Booker T's wife, Sharmell, entered the wrestling world as a WCW Nitro girl, later transitioning into an on-screen role as a manager and valet. In the WWE, Sharmell became integral to Booker T's storylines, particularly during his reign as King Booker, playing the role of Queen Sharmell. And during his feud against Booker, Engel repeatedly harassed Sharmell, which included a segment where he claimed that he wanted to have, quote, beast with her. This was not only an extremely disturbing storyline created by Vince McMahon, but it was a moment that made Kurt realize just how desperate he was to stay in the limelight. I totally regret it. I didn't want any part of it. Even though I got to wrestle Booker, I'd rather not wrestle Booker than do what I had to do with Sharmell. He'd also later reveal that Vince instructed him to be a pervert, and that was something he never would have done if he weren't so drug dependent. It also didn't help Kurt's mental state when in that same year, his friend and professional wrestling partner, Eddie Guerrero, died suddenly of heart failure. He was only 38 years old, and this made people reasonably assume that his early death had to do with his own battle in the past with drug and alcohol abuse. From there, Kurt's nosedive into substance abuse became more and more noticeable. Even Vince, who had been pushing him to his limits, scheduled a meeting with Kurt and expressed concerns about his health, recommending that he enter rehab. Kurt requested to be released by the company, because at the time, he didn't think he had a problem, nor did he want to stop consuming painkillers. And in a later interview, he explained that he had become so focused that he had no idea what was going on in his personal life. Everything was devoted to wrestling. I had some regrets because I was just starting to get good when I quit WWE in 2006. I was just starting to come into my own. Where I was, not that I didn't have incredible matches there, I did from 2006 to 2001, but I started really becoming a seasoned veteran 6 years into my career, and that was right around 2006. He He took a break for 3 months to lay low after Vince's intervention, but shocked fans shortly after when he signed a contract with TNA in October of 2006. With all of Kurt Angle's star power, fans felt completely blindsided. They could not comprehend why he would go down to the B leagues, as TNA was viewed as significantly inferior to WWE in nearly every way. But according to Angle, it was an opportunity to start fresh. The reason I signed with TNA, and there's nothing wrong with this, but when you're in WWE, it's a huge company. It's bigger than you. There's nothing you can do. You can have the greatest career of all time. You're not going to make a bigger impression on the company itself. TNA, it's a smaller company, and you're the bigger name in the company. You're carrying the company on your back and making it into a WWE. You have a purpose that way. And to an extent, Angle was right. TNA gave him the ability to train new wrestlers, perform in memorable matches, and gave him more creative power to do what he wanted. But once again, Kurt was choosing his career over his mental health. He was making efforts to replace Vicodin, but with a controlled release morphine medication. And when this wasn't enough, he started to mix whatever he was taking with alcohol.
I got my painkiller problem under control there because I found a doctor that got me on MS Contin. There are 2 morphine pills. They're very tiny, but they'll keep you from going through withdrawal. So I would take one in the morning, one at night, and no more painkillers. They were painkillers because they were morphine, but they were high dose. It was just 2 of them that I had to take. Well, I started having anxiety about breaking my neck over and over again, so they put me on Xanax. So now I'm taking Xanax. And then I switched to TNA, Impact Wrestling, and everybody drank there, so I started drinking alcohol.
And this is where Kurt Angle really hit rock bottom. By 2007, Kurt Angle's relationship with alcohol was taking on a life of its own, and now other lives were at risk. The first incident occurred when a witness saw him leave a bar, drive erratically, and nearly crash, leading to a DUI arrest. Although he was later found not guilty due to lack of evidence, it wasn't the wake-up call it should have been. In 2009, Kurt was arrested by the Moon Township Police Department after violating a protection of abuse order obtained by his girlfriend, Trinisha Biggers, who accused him of abuse and stalking. She had told the police that Angle had abused her physically, and he had been stalking her from outside a Starbucks. Trinisha reported to the police that Angle had taken possession of her BlackBerry cell phone, and she feared Angle was erasing text messages and photos that showed injuries she suffered during their altercation. Angle was arraigned on charges of harassment, and police found HGH and syringes in his car during the stop. According to the affidavit, Kurt told police the drug was prescribed to him legally. Once again, the charges were dropped after he and Trinisha reached an agreement to avoid contact with each other. But the last thing anyone should have done is let Kurt Angle back behind the wheel. On March 25th, 2011, North Dakota Highway Patrol officers found Kurt Angle in a smashed up red Dodge Durango with the smell of alcohol coming from the vehicle. He failed a field sobriety test and was arrested shortly afterward. This time, Angle pled guilty to the charges and was sentenced on April 20th, 2011 to 1 year of unsupervised probation, a chemical dependency evaluation, and a 10-day suspended sentence. Then in 2013, he was arrested again in Texas for his second DWI. After multiple arrests and near disasters, Kurt Angle's struggle with substance abuse officially destroyed his life. And after years of running from his problems and hopping from one addiction to another, Kurt tweeted, "In light of recent events, I will immediately be entering a rehabilitation center. I am confident that in taking these steps, I can begin to address necessary changes in my life." Rehab gave Kurt the opportunity to take responsibility for his actions and understand that he was lucky to have had so many chances. And on JRE, Kurt opened up about how the withdrawals he suffered were so extreme that it was more than enough to keep him sober for the rest of his life.
The one thing that I kept going across in my mind was going through withdrawal. I don't want to do that again. And I know if I start taking them, I'm going to have to experience that again, and I don't want to.
What is it like? What does withdrawal feel like?
Okay, you're sweating because you're hot and you're cold at the same time. You're shitting your pants. You're throwing up. Can't think straight. Your body's shaking. You're getting hot sweats, cold sweats. You feel like you don't have anything inside of you. No insides, no organs, nothing. You feel like you're hollow. It's just the craziest thing. It's the most painful thing I've ever gone through. You know, I'm sure people have been in a lot more pain than that with certain certain things they've had done to themselves. But for me, that was the worst.
And this was enough for Kurt to finally keep his promise. The thought of losing his family and the crippling pain of withdrawals was the wake-up call he truly needed. These days, some people still like to give Kurt Angle a hard time for his past mistakes, and he has been the subject of countless jokes, the most infamous one making fun of his drug habit by calling him Perk Angle. I've noticed the Perk Angle nickname trending on social media. While I know it's made in jest, it reminds me of a time when I struggled deeply with addiction and mental health challenges. Those memories are painful, but they also fuel my commitment to helping others. I've been clean for 12 years and have since built a life dedicated to purpose and service. Addiction destroys lives, but it's never too late to get help. I appreciate all the positive feedback and support. To my fans, thank you for never giving up on me. I love you all. And yeah, today Kurt Angle does look like a man who is constantly on uppers, but when you consider the extreme mental and physical pain he has suffered throughout his lifetime, he looks better than most. From the moment Kurt Angle wrestled on the mat to the moment he got sober, he was a man of extremes. He was the only Olympic wrestler to complete under the threat of paralysis or death. He lost 2 father figures and even his own sibling, and through it all, he never gave up. But he's also proven that this dedication comes with nasty side effects. There were countless moments where he could have taken a step back and learned his actions didn't just affect him. They also affected everyone he loved, and sometimes innocent people he didn't even know. Thankfully, he never hurt anyone, and he decided to choose survival. Instead of being another sob story, he became both an example of perseverance as well as an example that it's never too late to turn your life around.